I want to try to turn it up just a little bit. Is that too much? Is that about right? Better, 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 better. Is that doing anything? Must be wrong. Let's see. How about now? A little better? Okay. Not sure if I'm hitting the right button or not. Let's. Well, good morning. Got a lot of visitors here this morning. Welcome each and every one of you. We're always thankful to have visitors with us. Certainly a blessing to have you here with us. We would encourage you to follow along, test the things that we're saying here at East Cambridge, and make sure that it's in accordance with what's in the Bible. I was looking over and had to notice, and James actually writes a lot about the tongue, and we probably don't do as much teaching on the tongue as what we ought to, given the warnings that he gives. I mean, when you really stop and look at some of the warnings that he gives, they're pretty harsh. They're pretty. I don't. Trying to think of the right word. Really meant to grab our attentions, if you will. He uses strong language to describe how dangerous the tongue is, and maybe do a series of lessons. I'm not sure how many. I don't want to go. Don't want to get redundant, but I do want to cover quite a bit of what James has to say on the tongue. And this will probably be the first of maybe two or three, possibly four lessons, if you will, that we'll have on the tongue. And the first one I want to start with is the use of the tongue. Over in again the book of James, it gives one warning here in James chapter 1, verses 26 and 27. It says, if any among you thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his own heart, this one's religion is useless. Now that's a pretty stern warning. And again, I think we really, that's the seriousness behind this is, again, if you basically he's saying if you think you're religious, if you think you're right with the Lord, and you don't bridle your tongue, in other words, you don't control what you say and what comes out of your heart, you deceive yourself, and that your religion is useless. And so we really need to, I think, really take into consideration what he says. Now, our proof text will come from James chapter 3, verses 8 through 12 today. And it says, but no man can tame the tongue. It is an unruly evil full of deadly poison. With it we bless our God and our Father, and with it we curse men. We have been made in the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceeds blessings and cursings. My brethren, these things ought not to be so. Does a spring send forth fresh water and bitter from the same opening? Can a fig tree, my brethren, bear olives, or a grapevine bear figs? Thus no spring yields both salt water and fresh. So he mentions two things here in verse 10 as well as in verse 9. That the tongue does, and we see he says there again in verse 10, he says, out of the same mouth proceeds blessings and cursings. So the tongue can give forth blessings, and the tongue can give forth cursing. And so that's the thing. Those are the two things that I want to look at here this morning. Freedom of religion and speech are great civil liberties, and we're blessed to have them here in the United States. It means that government grants and protects our right to openly believe or say what we please. It does not mean that we have the same permissions that the same permissions are granted by God. U.S. Constitution permits all kinds of what God would consider to be wrongful speech to be had or be made in a public discourse. But the scriptures teach otherwise. God has much to say about what we can and cannot believe or say. God tells us that we can and cannot, tells us what we can and cannot believe and practice in religion. There's only one true religion. God also tells us what we can and cannot say with his blessing and his approval. So again, it's on us to adhere to what the scriptures say and to do them. So James shows that the same tongue is often, but should not be made to produce two opposing fruits. And again, I like to say those are blessings, that would be good fruit, and then cursings, which will be bad fruit. So let's begin by looking at blessings, if you will. Now, I know that this is not everyday vernacular. We don't go around saying, oh, he gave me a bunch of blessings, or he was, maybe we do to the extent of cursings, which we'll cover that here shortly. A little bit different meaning than, I think usually when I looked it up in like Merriam-Webster's, it said cursing is using vulgar language, like cussing. It's a little bit different meaning, if you will. But when I look over in the here, what's being communicated as far as blessing, the Greek lexicon or the Kittel said that it is to speak well, even in the sense of to speak finely or to speak well of someone. That is considered a blessing. Or this is what the Greeks would have understood what a blessing was. The second meaning is to praise, to extol, to eulogize, if you will. So the first blessing would be blessing God. We can use our tongues to bless or speak or extol God, if you will. It can be used to directly bless God, to thank Him for the things that He has done, to speak fondly of Him, to recognize Him as the great Creator. It can confess faith in Christ, as we're commanded, as like over in Romans chapter 10, verses 9 through 10 says that if we confess with our mouth that the Lord Jesus and believe in our heart that God has raised Him from the dead, you will be saved. And so that's why when we baptize someone, we ask them, do you confess that Jesus is the Son of God and that He was risen on the third day? Because we gather that from Romans chapter 10, verse 9. That comes from the tongue. And that's a good thing. That's something that we ought to be proud of, and we should all be willing. And many of us in this room have made that confession, that very confession. That is a good blessing. It can worship God, sing songs, hymns, spiritual songs. That's what we did here this morning. That's a blessing. It can pray. We offered up prayers, and we can pray privately or in public, however you may be. And we can also teach and preach. We had a Bible study. We're now having a sermon. These are all blessings that are being given unto God. And so these are good uses of the tongue. These are the things that we ought to be doing with the tongue. We can also bless our fellow man. Not only can we bless God, but we can also give blessings unto our fellow man. It can be used to bless him, to preach the gospel to him. I think we all understand that. Romans chapter 1, verses 15 and 16 says, so as much as it is in me, I am ready to preach the gospel to you who are in Rome also. For I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God to salvation for everyone who believes, for the Jew first and also to the Greek. So somebody had to preach the gospel for us to respond to it, so that we may know what it is to be in accordance with God's word, to follow his commands that are given over there in Mark chapter 16, 15, and 16. He also there, he says, go out in the world and preach the gospel to every creature, baptizing them. It can also be used to warn and rebuke a person in danger. Consider 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 2 through 4. It says, preach the word, be ready in season and out of season. Convince, rebuke, exhort with all long suffering and teaching. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but according to their own desires, because they have itching ears, they will heap up for themselves teachers, and they will turn their ears away from the truth and turn aside to fables. So, again, through preaching and teaching, we can warn about, people that are straying from the gospel. We can go to one another in private and warn each other for those who are straying. We can spread comfort and cheer among men. 1 Thessalonians 4:18 says, therefore comfort one another with these words. Especially during times of illness, times of lows, if you will, hardships, whatever that may be. We can strengthen and put things in perspective by sharing a portion of God's word, giving a blessing, giving encouragement. We can promote peace between men. Over the Beatitudes, over there in Matthew chapter 5, verse 9, he says, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. Peace is made with what? Through the tongue. Through oral literations, if you will. And then we have the example, over in how to settle sin between when somebody sins against you or disputes between brothers. It says, moreover, over there in Matthew 18, verses 15 through 17, moreover, if your brother sins against you, go to him, tell him your fault between you and him alone. If he hears you, you have gained your brother. But if he will not hear you, take one or two more, that by the mouth of two or three witnesses every word may be established. And if he refuses to hear them, tell it to the church. But if he refuses even to hear the church, let him be to you like a heathen or a tax collector. So we often say that's the pattern for settling disputes, for when somebody wrongs you. It's all done with the tongue. And to handle it in accordance with what the law of Christ tells us is a blessing. That's a good thing. So we should be encouraged, or we should be willing to use the tongue for such occasions. I would say we are even commanded to use the tongue for such occasions. However, we often use it for what James calls cursings. Now, this is the bad part. Again, coming from James chapter 3, verse 10, it says, out of the same mouth proceeds blessings and cursings. Cursings, looking over to the Oxford Standard Dictionary, it says, is a solemn appeal to a supernatural power to inflict harm upon someone or somebody. A cause of harm and misery. The second meaning is an offensive word or phrase used to express anger and annoyance towards someone. As a verb, it is to be afflicted with, utter or address with angry explicitives. The Greek lexicon Uh, and for the Greek word used there in James says to cause injury or harm by means of a statement, regardless of having some supernatural power. I think in today's world, a lot of people like to the supernatural. I think is spiritual versus non-spiritual, and what and I think the big takeaway here is in this definition is it is with having some or not having some. When we cause injury or harm by means of a statement that is cursing somebody. So it doesn't have to be an appeal to a supernatural being, like a wicked witch curses you, or I hope that God curses you. That certainly is a curse. Saying a curse, but it can also be just using a phrase to inflict injury or harm upon somebody. Um, so that's what a cursing is. And of course, cursing is the opposite of a blessing. It can be used to serve the purposes of hell. That's what we see there in James verse 6. It says, and the tongue is a fire. That's the purpose of this, my background. It's a fire of a world of iniquity. The tongue is so set among our members that it defiles the whole body, sets on fire the course of nature, and it is set on fire by hell. And so, we do the work of the devil when we do such things. When we sin, we're doing his bidding, if you will. It profanes the holy name of God and curses. It promotes false doctrines, if you will. That's doing the will of Satan, is it not? When we teach false doctrine, when we teach a doctrine that is something other than what God is, or what God has ordained. It also produces sin when overactive, if you will. Consider Proverbs chapter 10, verse 19. It says, in the multitude of words, sin is not lacking, but he who restrains his lips is wise. What happens when we get mad? We usually start, the figure of speech is we start foaming at the mouth. We start saying a lot of things that we shouldn't be saying. The tongue gets out of control. And some of those things that comes out of there, not only cussing, but can be cursings. Continuing with this idea of cursings, it can be used to curse man. Ruin the good names by lies, insinuations, and revealed secrets. Consider Proverbs chapter 11, verse 3, where the proverb writer says, the integrity of the upright will guide them, but the perversity of the unfaithful will destroy them. And when we go around and smearing somebody, and we go out on a campaign as often as what we see in our politics, that's what we do. And that idea of revealed secrets, that may be true and it may not be true. If it's not true, it's slander, right? And that's certainly something that we ought not to do. But sometimes there are things that should not be uttered. Just like in James, over in Matthew chapter 18, the pattern was you first go to that brother and address it between you and him. Don't take it publicly. Not the first thing we do. I got something to settle with brother so and so. This is what we don't go. We don't take it first thing we do. We don't take it to the congregation. We don't go from step 1 to step Z automatically. A cursing unnecessarily hurts people. And sometimes it is the truth. Yeah, it's the truth. But the truth can be used in a harmful way. Maybe it's uttered in the wrong setting. Maybe it's told to the wrong person. Next week we'll get into gossip and being a busybody, if you will. And yes, it may be necessary at times to share that that truthful information, but it should be done with a lot of restraint, should be done with a lot of caution, and the motive shouldn't be to bring necessarily shame or to harm your fellow brother or your fellow man. Consider John, John's third epistle, if you will, verse 9. I wrote to the church about Diotrephes, who loved to have the preeminence among them. Do not receive us. You know, here he put it out there, but I'm sure that he followed the pattern that he addressed that with Diotrephes before writing this epistle. Over in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 14 through 15, it says, Alexander the coppersmith did me much harm. May the Lord repay him according to his works. You also must be aware of him, for he has greatly resisted our words. Again, he's just letting people know that there's a harmful individual out there. But again, I think, looking over to Matthew chapter 18, I'm sure that they follow, when that first sin was committed against them, I'm sure they followed the pattern. But there becomes a time and place that, yes, that truth may need to come out, but it should come out for the right reasons, not for harmful reasons, is my point. It can be used, I'll continue on with it, can be used, sometimes, especially I remember as a kid, at school, well, say that to my face, sometimes we think it's okay if whatever we say, as long as I do say it to his face. Well, that's faulty logic. Again, there's a time and place. There's not necessarily a time and place for everything. Granted, we should share with people things that bother us or when they offend us or whatnot. But you don't need to go on a rant and a rave and be cussing and cursing a person just because they're in front of you. What I'm thinking of is, think of what do they call it today in traffic? Road rage. We've probably seen at least seen on TV or seen people in a real out on the road at intersections, putting their head out, screaming and hollering at people, throwing up hand gestures and stuff when they get aggravated at somebody's driving. That's something that we ought not to be partaking in as a Christian, if you will. When we get caught up in this stuff, it promotes strife. When we do these things, consider Proverbs chapter 26 and verse 20. It says, "Where there is no wood, the fire goes out, but where there is a talebearer, strife ceases." Or where there is no talebearer, strife ceases. But where there is a talebearer, somebody that share truths or not truths, again with the motive to bring harm upon somebody, that's where you have these little fires that spur up. And we see this in nations, in families, communities, as well as in the church. Many wars have been started with what? With the tongue. Many families have divided because of what? Because of the tongue, because of what was said. And many churches have split because of how the tongue was able to run rampant and out of control. I have up here, it often reveals the true character of its owner. Consider Matthew chapter 12, verses 34 through 37. Here he is rebuking the Pharisees. He says, "Brood of vipers, how can you, being evil, speak good things? For out of the abundance of your heart, the mouth speaks. A good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth good things, and the evil man out of the evil treasure brings forth evil things. But I say to you that for every idle word man may speak, they will give an account of it in the days of judgment. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned." So, let that soak in. Every idle word men may speak they will give an account of it on the day of judgment. Are you prepared to give an account for everything that your tongue has uttered? Has your tongue only uttered blessings? Or have you been caught up in these cursings? Something to think about. Foul language reveals a sinful desires and designs within the heart. Constant criticism often reveals envy and insecurity. We often tear down others in order to what? Build ourselves up, right? Popping off and telling them off, getting mad, in other words, reveals immaturity. I would argue that it also shows a lack of intelligence. Murmuring, i.e., constant grumbling, often reveals discontent and ingratitude in one's heart. Philippians chapter 4, verse 11 says, "Not that I speak in regard to need, for I have learned to, in whatever I state, I am to be content." Let's think about that one more time. Not that I speak in regard to need, for I have learned in whatever state I am to be content. So what if somebody is mean to you? So what if somebody does something that you don't like? Is it worth losing one's soul over? Is it worth losing control of the tongue and saying things that that is condemned by God? Remember, all sin is sin to God. Next week, the lesson is going to be the murderer's tongue, because remember there in verse 9, he says it is full of poison. The idea that the tongue can kill. It can not only kill your fellow man, but it's going to kill your soul if you don't get it under control. So that's the lesson. I'll commend it to you. Again, the uses of the tongues. We can use it in one of two ways. We can use it to bless somebody, or we can use it to curse somebody. And we choose which one we do. That's why we need to keep the heart in subjection. When we let it get out of control, then cursings are going to probably freely flow from it. May we realize the power of the tongue, and it is powerful. James says it's a small member, but just as a giant horse, if you will, just a little piece of metal in the bit is able to control it. A giant ship has a small rudder that steers and guides it wherever it goes. Same thing with the tongue. It's a small portion of the human body, but it is so powerful. It has the power to bless and to save, as well as the power to condemn and to bring forth one's into hell. It's your choice and how you use it. So for blessings or cursings, like a fire it can either serve or destroy. Fire, if it's controlled right, provides heat and warmth, right? But when fire gets out of control, it does what to the home? It destroys the home. May we realize the need to guard and bridle. Perhaps your tongue's gotten out of control. Perhaps your tongue has done something that it should not have done. And perhaps you'd like to call upon the prayers of the congregation. You know, that's kind of what Simon the sorcerer did. He uttered something that he shouldn't have uttered because his heart wasn't right. And he asked Peter to pray on his behalf. And we too can pray on your behalf. Or if perhaps you're not even a Christian, why not put aside the ways of the world? Why not come forward and ask to be baptized and come up out of that water grave a new creature? If you're subject to the gospel call in any shape, form, or manner, let it be known as we stand and sing the song of the chosen.